The Falcons were a quarterback away, so did adding Kirk Cousins make them the best team in the NFC South?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for a lifetime, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong in this illustrious podcast, where you also may know me as Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the Iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And of course, I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me each and every day that makes this illustrious podcast your first listen or first watch each and every day. We call you the everydayers. You're so special to me. And if you want to be special to me and become an everydayer, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we are joined by Sam Monson, the PFF lead NFL analyst, also the co-host of the PFF NFL podcast alongside Steve Palazzolo. And he's here with us to talk some Falcons, talk some Zach Robinson, talk some NFC South. So without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Sam Monson right now. And Sam, this is actually your second appearance on this podcast. You made a appearance way back in March of 2017. I know you don't remember that, but you were back then talking about Dontari Poe and Jack Crawford joining the Atlanta Falcons. But I only bring that up, Sam, just because the last time you were on the podcast talking to Atlanta Falcons, the Falcons made the playoffs that year. They haven't made it since. So I'm hoping that you can go 2 for 2 with bringing some good mojo back to this podcast as well as this football team. But welcome to Locked On Falcons.
Thanks. Yeah, back by popular demand, like 7 years later or whatever it is.
Yeah. So obviously the Falcons had a notable offseason, making that big upgrade at the quarterback position, adding Kirk Cousins, drafting Michael Penix, feeling like they're set at the quarterback position for the next decade plus. And definitely you can see sort of the logic behind those two moves, even if they weren't necessarily the most precedented of moves when it came to the position. You've sort of expressed the logic, of their decision to sort of go all in on these two quarterbacks on your podcast and elsewhere. I've been a tad critical of the Falcons, just a tad, of maybe not investing as many resources in other problem areas of the roster like their pass rush. But clearly the team is kind of taking the approach of we're a quarterback away. Do you think that's a fair assessment of their offseason approach? And do you think that was the right approach for them to take this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take it as sort of two separate moves, it makes a lot of sense, or it makes a lot more sense. Kirk Cousins coming onto this roster, I think immediately makes them the best team in that division, a playoff team, and an offense that absolutely could make some noise in the postseason if, the projections that we have for some of the players on the roster, as well as, new coaching staff and all those kinds of things, if all that goes the way we expect it to, the Falcons are a really good team right now. I mean, we have been lamenting, the use of Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts and even Drake London within the old scheme. And we think that they've been held back and, restricted from becoming the players that they could be. Well, now you've got Kirk Cousins throwing in the ball. So immediately you've the biggest upgrade in quarterback over the offseason, even including somebody like Caleb Williams coming in for Chicago. The offense will be Zach Robinson bringing over a McVay type of scheme. So one of the most successful schemes in the NFL, and effectively the same system that Kirk Cousins has been running in Minnesota. So it should be a fairly seamless transition from his point of view. So if they stop there, you would say phenomenal, right? The Falcons have brought in a quarterback that has been playing like a top 10 guy in the last few years into a system that's ready to accommodate him. And away we go. We're going to be cooking. And then you say, well, okay, now you've done that. What does the Michael Penix Jr. Pick do? And that effectively is just a toss-up between what is more valuable to this team, theoretically securing the future of that position and an orderly transition from Kirk Cousins to Michael Penix, like the Packers have done with, Favre to Rodgers, Rodgers to Jordan Love, and being set for the next 10 years, or, any individual, presumably defensive player that they could have taken at number 8 overall in this draft. And I've kind of argued this out, played it out, debated it various ways. I think I keep coming back to the idea that I don't think I would have done it personally, but you can at least understand the argument that they're making. And like, you can't disprove it until we get to the transition, in a few years down the line. And even then, you'll never have the counterfactual to be able to sort of definitively say this was 100% wrong, like, unless Michael Penix just doesn't work out and is a disaster and, all those kinds of things. So it is an unprecedented move. It's completely out there relative to what other teams would do, but I at least understand the logic, and it's very difficult to kind of completely argue against it, because if they get it right, it's the most valuable thing they can do for this team.
Yeah, definitely. Now, getting that upgrade at quarterback, that's been something that we've seen a lot of teams over the last couple of years trying to get that veteran upgrade. It hasn't always worked out in those teams' favor. Some cases it has with, Tom Brady and Matt Stafford with the Rams and Bucks and whatnot. But we saw the Saints kind of take a similar approach, upgrading their quarterback last offseason, bringing in someone like Derek Carr. They did improve their record, but they sort of fell short of their playoff hopes. And now we sit here a year after that Derek Carr signing, and a lot of people are critical of that move and feeling like the Saints aren't necessarily moving in the right direction. I'm curious, what do you think are the chances that a year from now we're having a similar conversation about the Falcons and Kirk Cousins? Or do you feel like the presence of someone like Michael Penix waiting in the wings and having that potential off-ramp maybe gives the Falcons, even if Kirk Cousins doesn't quite live up to the expectations this year, it gives the Falcons at least a little bit more hope into the future that the Saints don't necessarily have at this point in time, unless, maybe you're a Spencer Rattler believer, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah. The Saints move for Derek Carr always felt a little bit like settling. It's like, we don't have a great answer at quarterback, so let's just grab Derek Carr. That'll be enough to take a bad division, and we can just sort of punt the problem down the road for a couple of years. And that's, I think, what everybody thought was going to happen. And then Derek Carr didn't play particularly well at the start of the season. They fell too far behind. The Bucks were surprisingly good, and ultimately they didn't end up taking that division. There's a couple of ways it's different, I think. Number one, Derek Carr by the end of the year was actually playing pretty well. And if they get that version of Derek Carr, like if it just took him half a season to sort of make the transition and get settled and get back to this usual level, they might be a lot better this year than they were last season by playing at that level the whole year. I think Kirk Cousins has been consistently better than Derek Carr for the last few years. I also think that because of that, he's effectively stepping into the same offense. The transition should be smoother than it was for Derek Carr. He doesn't have to learn a new system. He doesn't have to change what he's doing. He can effectively walk from one system to the other one, just changing the personnel. That should help. I guess the flip side of that is he is coming off an Achilles. He is older. Those are things that could work against him. But theoretically, I think that this should be a successful move for them. The only question becomes, how much longer does Kirk Cousins have at this age? And we're in this strange world now, post Tom Brady landscape, where nobody has any idea how long a quarterback is going to last anymore. And there used to be a fairly set age that once that guy hit 35, the clock was ticking. Now, 35, Tom Brady played for like another 10 years at that point, and played at a high level. Like we didn't really reach the age where Tom Brady physically stopped being able to handle it. He just ultimately decided to walk away. So Kirk Cousins at 35 could be in the last couple of years of his NFL career and could be, already on the way out, or he could be at the start of the next 2 contracts that he's going to get. We just don't have any real way of knowing. And so, on the one hand, Kirk Cousins has never been like a physical specimen, right? He's not a guy that you would say, okay, that guy's going to last forever. He's got special physical traits. On the other hand, you watch that Netflix quarterback documentary, nobody squeezes the last ounce of what they have in terms of talent or their physical ability better than Kirk Cousins. So, he has been looking after himself. He has been keeping on the right side of nutrition and medical science and all that kind of stuff, the modern ways that I think generally quarterbacks are lasting longer. So it is a big unknown how long this transition is going to take, but I think we should get at least 2 years of good Kirk Cousins play before they reach the point where there is a natural sort of handoff point contract wise and the time that Michael Penix is there, and then they have decisions to make, right?
So it's clear that Sam likes the direction that the Falcons offense is headed, but what are his thoughts on the Falcons defense? And will it potentially hold the team back from reaching their full potential of winning the NFC South? We'll get into all of that and more as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now it is time to get back into the ballpark this summer, and Game Time is making it easy because they are an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball. And I know it's the All-Star break, and maybe you want to buy tickets ahead of next week's action, or you just want to wait and be spontaneous, and Game Time is going to let you do either one. And the great thing about Game Time is the prices on the app go down the closer you get to the first pitch. You can shop flash deals where you can save on exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game. And of course, we all love their views from your seat. You get that panoramic vision of where you're going to be sitting to find that perfect spot. And whether you're into Braves, baseball, Atlanta United, other sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you, Game Time is taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And guys, I want to tell you about Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you each and every day to bring you the biggest stories, can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So here with Sam Monson, lead NFL analyst for Pro Football Focus, and PFF recently unveiled their various unit rankings over the past month, and the Falcons offense ranked pretty well. You had sort of top 6 rankings for their running back group, their offensive line, top half of the league for their receiver group. But, the rankings weren't quite as generous to the Falcons defense, with their D-line, linebackers, and secondary ranking 22nd or lower. It feels like a well-worn trope with the Atlanta Falcons, where they have capable quarterback play, good skill position players, but a lot of questions surrounding their defense's ability to get stops and pressure opposing quarterbacks. Do you feel like that's the sort of Achilles heel? If this Falcon team falls short of expectations, it will be on, some of the concerns on the defensive side of the ball. And do you think there's anything that the Falcons can do about that, between now and the start of the season to maybe rectify that situation?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the weak side of the team. Just on paper, it looks a lot weaker than the offense does. It's weaker across the board. I think the Michael Penix Jr. Decision only enhanced that, right? Like presumably that number 8 pick would have gone on a defensive player, would have been the top defender off the board, and theoretically would have been like an instant impact type of addition. And instead, you make the Michael Penix Jr. pick, and then it felt like the rest of the draft was almost just like throwing darts, on the defensive side. Well, we didn't get the best defensive player in the draft, so let's just grab a bunch of guys and hope that we can recreate that with a few bodies, in the aggregate, like the Moneyball clip. And then it might work, you might end up finding a guy in that collection of picks that ends up making an impact and actually changing the whole dynamic there. But for a while now, the Falcons have been one of the worst teams in the NFL at generating pressure. You look at the group up front, it looks like it's going to be the same story. David Onyemata is a really good player. Grady Jarrett has been a really good player, but looks like he's declined a little bit from his best play. And in particular on the edge, there's just no consistent source of pass rush at the moment. And without that, that makes everybody else's job more difficult. It makes the back seven's job more difficult. So even though a guy like AJ Terrell, I think is a really good top tier corner, and Jesse Bates is a great safety, like those guys just have a much more difficult job if the pass rush can't get home on a consistent basis. They've got to cover for longer. They're exposed for longer. And ultimately the best, a good pass beats good coverage. So they're going to get picked apart more often. So, yeah, it does look like the weaker side of this team. The question is, how much can it drag them back? Like if the offense is really, really good, you'd love to have a great defense, but I think it's not as important as it used to be. Maybe you can have, a relatively weak unit and still make the postseason, still beat some teams along the way.
Yeah, definitely. Now, when it comes to making the postseason, obviously winning the division is going to be the key. If Which of these teams in the NFC South do you feel like is the biggest obstacle preventing the Falcons from winning the division? Who is the team that they're going to have to overcome? Is it as simple as, since the Bucks have won it 3 years in a row, you got to beat the king to wear the crown, sort of thing?
No, I feel like it's kind of a coin flip between the Bucks and the Saints. Like I said, I think Derek Carr was playing well towards the end of the year, and if you get that guy for 17 games, the Saints are a better team than they looked a year ago. Now, there's been some offseason churn there, and they've got some issues themselves, particularly on the offensive line. But I think that's a better team than they showed last year, and they're definitely in the mix. And then Tampa Bay, but they got a good season out of Baker Mayfield, but the guy that received most of the credit for that, Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator, he's now in Carolina. So I think it's definitely not a guarantee that Baker just picks up the way he left off last season in Tampa Bay. And if he regresses a bit, if he takes a step back or just has a bad year relative to last season, the Bucks won't be as strong as they looked last year. So I think those two teams feel like a coin flip to me. And then Atlanta is definitely the favorite of the three.
Curious, since we're going around the NFC South, what are your thoughts on Carolina? I know there was a lot of hype for the Panthers a year ago going into last season. Obviously, they came nowhere close to living up to that hype and wound up being the worst team in football. Is there a chance that, maybe some of that hype is misplaced and now it's, Dave Canales can sort of live up to some of the hype that, Frank Reich and his coaching staff was able to get a year ago, and that team is maybe underrated in your eyes?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like they shouldn't have been as bad as they were a year ago. And it was a shock that they were that terrible and everything was awful. And people got fired at the end of it. Like it was that bad. In particular, like the offensive line should not have been as bad as it was a year ago. So I think there's definitely a chance that in a new scheme and just a new year, that offensive line plays a lot better, even independent of the additions that they've made to it. Um, it's difficult to come out of that season and not be concerned for Bryce Young and the way he played. Good quarterbacks have come out of the other side of truly awful rookie seasons before, but most of them, most quarterbacks that have years that bad don't become good NFL quarterbacks. So, but if you're going to come out of the other side of it, you need the things that happened for this team in the offseason, right? They upgraded the coaching staff with Dave Canales, who had that incredible season out of Baker Mayfield, who got that rebound out of Geno Smith before, who's got like a track record now of getting the most out of quarterbacks. So they upgraded there. They've added receiving weaponry, which was terrible last year. Adam Thielen was like the only half reliable target they had. Now they've got Deontay Johnson. They draft Xavier Legette, who's this incredible, big-bodied, fast, like just physically imposing receiver. So that group should be better as well. And then the offensive line, as we said, has got a couple of upgrades and shouldn't have been as bad as it was a year ago either. So theoretically, all those important elements of like supporting the quarterback got better this year. They even drafted a running back for what difference that makes in today's NFL. So everything around Bryce Young improved. Now it's on him to show that he was worth the number one overall pick. And I know there'll be a lot of revision history, right? Because CJ Stroud was so good as a rookie and Bryce Young was such a disaster. Most people thought that Bryce Young was the best quarterback in that draft class. There was definitely a group that had Stroud number one, but Bryce Young was, if not the consensus, then, the plurality of people thought Bryce Young was the top guy. So, now he's going to show that this is the year now that everything around him got better.
So we have some key storylines coming into camp. We'll get Sam's thoughts on that, as well as whether or not play calling may hold the key to winning this division if Zach Robinson can give the Falcons a leg up, and that we will continue exploring as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. But guys, I want to tell you that today's episode of Locked On Falcons is sponsored by BetterHelp, and oftentimes comparison can be the thief of joy, and it's easy to compare yourselves and envy other people's lives, and it might look like they have it all together when you're scrolling through Instagram, but in reality, they probably don't. And therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so that you can start living your best life. And therapy has taught me positive coping skills, like you can only control what you can control. So I guess I can't really control what other people put on Instagram, but I can certainly control, what my desires and all that stuff. And especially when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons, I can't control, whether or not they want to help a brother out and make me feel better about their upcoming season, but I can't control the quality of the podcast. But if you're thinking of starting therapy, why not give BetterHelp a try? It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing, start focusing with BetterHelp by visiting betterhelp.com/lockedon, and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Now, we're only weeks away from the start of every NFL training camp. And is there maybe a particular position battle or narrative involving the Falcons that you're going to be keeping your eye on, or maybe eagerly anticipating how it plays out once practices kick off later this month?
I'm really kind of just intrigued to see how all those offensive weapons play out. What's that usage pattern going to look like? What's the backfield dynamic going to be? Are we just going to give Bijan the keys, or are we still going to be splitting the workload with Tyler Algier? The new kind of the under the radar additions that they made with those receiving cores are kind of interesting to me. Rondale Moore, Ray McLeod. I know Zach Robinson loves that guy. I'm kind of curious to see if any of those guys are able to make a more of an impact, or if Robinson can dial stuff up for them and turn them into more than they'd been in their previous stop. So just that, I think this is such a talented group on offense. I'm really curious to see how the ball gets shared around and what each one of these players can end up doing within it.
So my last question for you, Sam, is, with Zach Robinson being here in Atlanta and obviously having a background working over at PFF, if the Falcons are successful, will you be taking all the credit for teaching Zach Robinson everything he knows?
Yeah, absolutely. We're already taking the credit. Like we just need Zach to not screw it up, and then we can keep on taking all the credit. No, Zach's a great guy. Like he's earned everything he's gotten so far, and couldn't be happier for him to get this opportunity and to see what he can do. I mean, he's been teaching us football since he got to PFF. He's been, he's a great mind, a great person to talk to about it. So really excited to see what he can do with this group.
Absolutely. Well, Sam, I appreciate you joining me, talking Atlanta Falcons, talking some NFC South. Let the people know some of the stuff that you're working on over at PFF, plug the podcast, all that and more.
Yeah, the PFF NFL podcast, either on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. That's what myself and Steve are doing with most of our time, and planning good stuff for the season ahead.
So, guys, there you have it. Sam Monson, PFF. Appreciate Sam coming on and sharing his thoughts on the Atlanta Falcons. Sam and Steve have been pretty high on the Falcons ever since they picked up Kirk Cousins and Zach Robinson. So it was nice to sort of get him on the pod to express their positivity on the pod, especially when you contrast it with, my Mr. Drew persona that I've been donning pretty consistently over the last, 4 or 5 months. But, one of the things to wrap up today, talking about something that Sam brought up and I've heard others recently thought, and I just kind of connected the dots. Like I'm 100% sure I was aware of this, but I didn't really connect the dots on it. But we have 4 brand new offensive coordinators in the NFC South, right? Zach Robinson here in Atlanta, Dave Canales in Carolina, Clint Kubiak in New Orleans, and Liam Cohen in Tampa Bay. And I think sort of the idea that I've sort of connected the dots on is just the idea that, like, probably the team that probably winds up winning the division is the team that their offensive coordinator kind of hits the ground running. That you can argue that a big reason why the Bucs were able to win the division last year was because Dave Canales and Baker Mayfield, kind of got on the same page, and that offense was clicking. And obviously the Saints and with Derek Carr and Pete Carmichael, and the Falcons with Desmond Ridder and Arthur Smith weren't quite clicking on the same level. And we know that Frank Reich and Thomas Brown and all those guys were not clicking with Bryce Young in Carolina. And so I think for that reason, that's part of the reason why I think a lot of people are optimistic about the Falcons, for some of the reasons that Sam mentioned. with Zach Robinson and Kirk Cousins, and maybe not having worked together, but certainly coming from very similar backgrounds in terms of the types of offense that Kirk Cousins has played in, the type of offense that we're expecting Zach Robinson. And it's part of the reason why I continue to say on this podcast, as I have done for several months, that despite all the talk about the upgrade at the quarterback, I really do think that the critical X factor that's going to decide the fact of the Falcon season is Zach Robinson and how good a play caller he winds up being. And this just sort of, fuels that fire in that regard. But one of the things I do want to do, and I've mentioned before on the podcast, and just, sort of starting getting into it, and certainly we'll further explore it in the coming days and weeks and in the future here on the podcast, is watching this Rams offense and sort of looking at some of the things that we could see Zach Robinson, focusing on some of the things that we could see Zach Robinson do differently than Arthur Smith that theoretically should be better than Arthur Smith and lead to more positive results. So as I pour through the film, that will be something I'll be focusing on, and we'll have a future breakdown of that on the podcast. But, if you happen to be a Locked On Falcons insider, you'll probably get that breakdown and get the film to watch earlier than when that comes on the podcast. They are paying customers after all. But, the beautiful thing about becoming a Locked On Falcons insider is just you don't have to be a paying customer right away. You get a 14-day free trial before you have to pay a dime. So, theoretically, you could probably sign up today and get that analysis and that film breakdown of this Rams offense and some of the parallels and whatnot, for free at some point in the next 14 days. So head on over to that by hitting that link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/lockedonfalcons. You get a 14-day free trial. Then it's $4.99 a month after that if you like it. Of course, you'll also have access to all the draft breakdowns that I did, free agent breakdowns I did all offseason long, as well as the extended all 22 reviews from last year if you feel compelled to go back down memory lane and watch the Arthur Smith offense to contrast with the Zach Robinson offense. So that is all available for you as a Locked On Falcons insider. So again, hit that link in the description below. It's a 14-day free trial, 14 days for free, 2 weeks for free. And then, see if you like it and then maybe pay after that. So that is something that you guys can check out. I think tomorrow's episode, we'll talk a little bit about some of the underrated players that are kind of flying under the radar. Sam kind of touched on two of them that I'm probably going to get into is Tyler Algier and Ray McLeod. That's what we're planning on doing tomorrow in the episode. Of course, we have more Falcons historian player shootouts. We're in round 2 of that breakdown, and those will be in store for you as well later this week, as well as other things to get you guys geared up for the upcoming training camp where, less than 10 days away, as many of you guys are listening to this. So, the clock is ticking. So exciting things are on the horizon here on Locked On Falcons. And if you're excited by those things, all you got to do is continue to make us your first listen by subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, guys, for your second listens, check out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Hawks. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every